Ace Podcast.
Hi, this is Craig.
This is Aaron from Two Middle-Aged Dudes and a Microphone.
And you're listening to Vaguely Accurate.
It's the Science Podcast on the ACE Podcast Network.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another very exciting episode of Vaguely Accurate. As always, I am your host DK, and for those that don't know, we are the science show giving early career researchers the opportunity to talk openly and freely about their research. We're giving you a voice to talk about what you want to. So today we're traveling internationally and with a very exciting episode. We met Angela Poff. She is a research associate currently at the University of South Florida and also an adjunct professor at the University of Tampa. She also is a CEO of her own medical consultancy. Her PhD research focuses on the development and testing of non-toxic metabolic therapies for cancer and neurological disorders. And I must say, I learned tons talking to Angela. It was fantastic to talk to her, and I'd like to thank her for the inconvenient timings that we had to try and arrange our Skype. It was great. So, like I just said, it's a Skype meeting, so it should sound okay. Hope it doesn't sound too bad for you all. As always, I'd like to promote ACE Podcasts. They are a fantastic group of guys who have doing a lot for the network and for the shows and hosts of their shows. Today, I'd like to promote the show Battle for the Ages. It's kind of a topical debate show where they pick up two hot topics or even just two regularly argued topics such as DC and Marvel or even anything else related to movies, and whether they agree with it or not, they have to go with it. And I've recently been listening to their DC and Marvel episodes, and it's really entertaining, especially if you're a bit of a geek. But yeah, so as always, that's Ace Podcast, and if you're interested in podcasting yourself, they specialize in early startups of podcasts and helping people to establish their shows. And if you're a scientist out there and want to talk about your research or a field you're passionate about, give them a shout. Their website's acepodcastnetwork.com. You'll find all the information on there. Anyway, guys, let's get into the show, and I hope you enjoy it. Take care. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming on the show. Do you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about the field that you study?
Sure. So my name is Angela Poff. I am a research associate at the University of South Florida. I did my undergraduate work at Hendrix College in biochemistry and molecular biology, and then did my master's and PhD here at USF in the Department of Molecular Pharmacology and Physiology. And I've stayed at USF largely so that I could continue the work that I did in my PhD, which I really enjoyed. And my field is cancer metabolism. So my lab is kind of a metabolic targeting lab. So we like to look at how metabolism is altered in various diseases. We have a lot of cancer work going on, but also neurological diseases. We look at, and I primarily focus on cancer. And so we're just trying to target the metabolic defects that are associated with cancer, meaning basically there are abnormal ways that cancer cells take in energy and make energy to drive their growth and their survival. And so we're trying to find novel, non-toxic, primarily ways of doing that. And much of our focus is on diet.
Okay, so for those that don't know, are you able to give a brief overview on exactly what is cancer, what is happening in the body, what is happening to the cells when cancer is present, and yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good question because it's kind of one of those things that everyone knows about, but it's hard to kind of pin down exactly what it is, right? So basically, cancer is what happens when our own cells go kind of haywire in a way that they will grow uncontrollably. So typically our cells in our body will only divide under very specific circumstances when they're told to do so. And that's important, right? Because you don't want the cells to be behaving abnormally or doing things without kind of a lot of regulation controlling them. And so there's actually like a number of published hallmarks of cancer. So these kind of behaviors that a cell has to acquire to become cancerous. And it's things like sustaining proliferation, which means that the cell will be told over and over, kind of by itself typically, to divide again and again. And things like evading apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. And so most of our body cells, if something goes wrong in them, they will initiate these programmed mechanisms to terminate the cell so that you don't get things like cancer. But cancer will find ways to kind of evade those signals as well. So there's this whole kind of list of behaviors that a cell has to acquire and results in unbridled growth of a cell and its progeny to a tumor. And kind of the most dangerous and end stage type behavior that makes a tumor cancerous is the acquisition of what we call invasion and metastasis. And this is when the cells kind of acquire this capability to move from where they're located originally to the bloodstream perhaps, or the lymph system, and then to other locations in the body. And that's when you get metastatic cancer, and that's really the most dangerous kind of point. Once a tumor has spread, it becomes much more difficult to treat long term.
So with, you've mentioned the spread, and there's many types of cancer. So people always refer to cancer as being a singular unit or just cancer in itself, but it's kind of a common misconception that there are quite a few different types of cancer. Are there the differences between the type? Is it just the origin in which they kind of come about, like the part of the body that comes about, but like you said, they all carry the similar characteristics?
Yeah, primarily. So, cancers are named for the origin tissue that they come from. So that's why you can have basically a cancer from any tissue in the body. So, tumors that form in the brain, or brain tumors, brain cancer, in the breast cancer, things like that. And they do all carry these the hallmarks of cancer that I mentioned, these specific characteristics that make them cancerous. But they do exhibit differences as well. A lot of them, specific types of cancer, will have certain mutations, genetic mutations that are highly associated with that specific type of cancer that you don't see in other types of cancer. And they behave differently as well, depending on where they came from. So even tumors that form from different cell types within the same tissue. So you can have tumors that form from neurons in the brain or from glial cells, which are another type of cell in the brain. And those types of cancers will behave differently because of kind of the inherent differences in the cell that it came from. So cancer kind of is this, you're absolutely right, it's a collection of diseases because you do have these different types of cancer, but they do also have similar characteristics. And of course, those are the ones that maybe we're most interested, at least my lab, in targeting, trying to target these similar characteristics of cancer so that you could have widespread applicability of treatments and things like that.
Yeah, so with the way that, like you said, they've all got different characteristics, and I would assume even though they all kind of share these similar characteristics, they would be treated and respond to treatments very similar. And in order to understand your research when we get into it, I feel like it's nice to get a comprehensive overview of where we're going with this. Are you able just to briefly outline what other cancer treatments are out there? And your research itself is an adjuvant, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, an adjuvant therapy, so it's secondary tumours. So could you explain the difference between a primary and a secondary tumour as well?
Sure. So, okay, you asked about types of treatments. So generally speaking, standard of care treatment includes surgery if it's applicable. So if the tumor is in a location where it's safe, to perform surgery, and also if it makes sense to perform surgery. So, for example, if there's a large primary tumor, that's not invading, kind of sensitive areas, or if it's not spread to the point where you have many multiple kind of tumors throughout the body, that might be more applicable for surgery. And then chemotherapy and radiation. Chemotherapy is really a kind of general term. There's a large number of chemotherapeutic agents that fall under that umbrella, some which are very highly specific to certain mutations within certain types of cancer. And so those kind of specific targeted treatments you may find, are approved for use in only a very specific subset of cancer, some very certain type of cancer, versus kind of the classically cytotoxic is what we call chemotherapies, where they're not specifically targeting any kind of specific mutation perhaps in the tumor, but instead are generally damaging to cells, and the tumors that are rapidly growing are then going to be kind of damaged by them. And then you also have radiation therapy, which is a dose of ionizing radiation, which will damage the tumor as well. So generally speaking, that's kind of the range of therapies that are used in the clinic right now. And so we're interested in adjuvant therapies that would kind of support the health of the individual and also sensitize the tumor to perhaps the standard of care therapies. And so what we're finding is some of the stuff that we're interested in. So one of the main things that I study is the ketogenic diet. And this is a diet that is a very low carbohydrate diet, moderate in protein, and actually very high in fat. And this diet has been used clinically for about a century for pediatric epilepsy. So it's actually extremely effective in preventing seizures in individuals who don't respond to anti-epileptic medications. And what's interesting is this diet is now being studied for therapeutic effects in a very large number of disorders, cancer, but also neurological conditions like Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, various neurodegenerative processes. And so what we're seeing is the ketogenic diet seems to have anti-cancer effects in and of itself, but also seems to enhance the response to standard of care. So at least some preclinical models, which is largely what we have preclinical data right now on this diet, we see that the animals respond better to chemotherapy and radiation when they are in ketosis with the ketogenic diet. And then you also, there's a lot of reasons to think that you would have also protection of the healthy tissues, especially the brain, during these kind of treatments. So we're interested in studying the mechanisms by which that happens and also the efficacy, just to make sure, kind of what we're seeing in our preclinical models is going to pan out in humans. It doesn't always do that, but there is a lot of encouraging preclinical data where it's concerned.
That's really fascinating. I had no idea. I knew diet's important in your life, but I had no idea that it's able to control or I suppose mitigate the severity of a disease or even make it more susceptible to treatment therapies. Are you able to elaborate a tiny bit further in as lay as possible? So the mechanism that is occurring when you're in ketosis that causes, I suppose, cells or treatment to be easily done, I suppose, and also why, where am I going with this? Why other diseases, like you've mentioned before, that other chronic, like epilepsy, chronic diseases, also respond really well to this diet?
Yeah. So it's a good question, and it's one that's definitely not clearly elucidated. There's a lot of potential mechanisms, and that's one of the things that's interesting about this diet is it's simultaneously influencing a large number of things in the body. So what we think with the ketogenic diet and cancer primarily is it's targeting a glucose requirement of tumors. So when you consume carbohydrate, whether it's sugars or starches or any kind of bread, pasta, it gets broken down into something called glucose in your body. And glucose is kind of the primary fuel that our tissues are running off of primarily. As long as we're eating a diet that's even modestly high in carbohydrate, which most of us are today, you're going to be primarily burning glucose as the fuel for your body. So tumors, actually, cancers have a very high glucose requirement. They actually take in extremely high levels of glucose, and they metabolize it in a way that's different than our normal tissues. And I won't get into kind of the nitty-gritty details on it because it's a little complicated. But, this is even like the basis of a diagnostic imaging tool called FDG PET scan. So if you've ever heard of someone getting a PET scan, it actually labels, you use radioactively labeled glucose, and then the individual where that glucose is being taken up is actually demonstrating where the cancer is, because the cancer is sucking up so much glucose. Okay. So glucose and the glucose metabolism pathways, for various reasons, seem to be very important for most cancers in terms of supporting their rapid growth and survival. And so with the ketogenic diet, you're eating a very low carbohydrate diet. So there is, generally speaking, a modest reduction in your blood glucose levels, which there has been some clinical data showing that on a ketogenic diet, tumors are taking in less glucose than they were. The study that I'm thinking of was just in 2 patients, but it showed about a 21% reduction of glucose to the tumor, which maybe doesn't sound like that much, but when you're talking about a tumor that is avidly using this substrate to fuel its growth, then you can kind of see why it might be having an effect. Now, what's interesting to me are actually the kind of consequential effects of being in ketosis. So this whole, glucose reduction with the ketogenic diet was the original hypothesis as to why the ketogenic diet might be effective for cancer. But what we're starting to see is that the actual elevation in blood ketones, which is the consequence of when you go on a ketogenic diet, you lower glucose and then your body starts burning fat from your diet and or from your stored body fat to make these molecules called ketones. And these ketones we're actually now seeing seem to have direct anti-cancer effects through a variety of potential mechanisms. It's very interesting.
It is.
Yeah, well, it kind of comes down to the fact that the food we eat and the metabolites that are produced from the food we eat are more than just energy. They are signaling molecules. So they are kind of the communication from the outside world to our body. That's how our tissues know what kind of environment it's in, whether or not to, grow new tissue or not, right? So the molecules that come from the food we eat actually direct a lot of what happens in the body, control the genetic expression, control processes. And what we see is that ketones basically have signaling properties which alter gene expression in a way that seems to be anti-cancerous, reduces inflammation, so actually inhibits a component of the innate immune system that induces inflammation, that would be anti-cancerous, reduces oxidative stress and damage, induces kind of repair mechanisms. So it makes sense when you kind of look at the more specific results of this, but I agree, and when I got into this field, or when the first time I ever heard about this idea, I was exactly like you. I was like, really, a diet, like how can that really affect a disease like cancer? And It absolutely does. So
I mean, it makes complete sense when you like putting it in complete layman's terms. Here is like, the fuel you put into your car makes it run better, the performance of the car better, or it makes it last longer.
Yeah.
So I suppose the fuel you put into your body, it has a direct impact on the way that your body functions and how long it lasts and stuff. And to summarize kind of what you've just said, original hypothesis was almost cancer has a sweet tooth because sugar tends to be quite simple to break down, and the whole theory was if we starved the cancer cells because it had a higher, it was hungry more often, then they would it would just multiply less or make it a weaker state, whereas it's actually the byproduct of a ketosis diet, so having lower carbs, but because it burns fat, the byproduct of that molecule, that chemical in itself seems to be having this profound implication across the whole body in its various forms.
Yeah, and I think it's both. I think you are getting a benefit from reducing glucose to the tumor, but I think absolutely a big part of the story is also the ketosis, and that's something that I've studied as well, because we've studied. It's difficult for some people to follow such a diet, and so we have created some compounds that will elevate your blood ketones regardless of your diet. And at least in our model, which was a model of metastatic cancer, we had a similar response to the exogenous ketones, is what we call them, versus the ketogenic diet. So they do seem to be a really important part of the story.
Yeah, so I'd like to ask, what motivated you to get into this? It's quite a niche field, and like you said, you sounded quite surprised that the nutritional benefits and on chronic diseases is so, I suppose, significant. What got you into this? What motivated you to take this path? You said before that you followed your honors through to postdoc to current position. We're all working on a similar field, so please.
Yeah. So, I always knew that I wanted to do science. I don't think there was even ever a time in my life, even when I was very young, that anything else kind of even sounded interesting to me as a career choice. And I loved the idea of kind of contributing to maybe the discovery of something new, which is what pushed me more towards science versus, like clinical studies or medicine. And so, after my undergraduate studies, to do a research science, typically, you go to a PhD, and most of the time now, at least in the States, you have these umbrella programs where you have a program maybe in like biomedical sciences, and then within that program there's many departments, and so you apply to the program, and then you go in and you rotate with different labs and kind of find a lab that interests you. And actually at that time I was originally very interested in infectious disease, and I rotated in a lab that studied malaria, which I found to be really interesting. But a professor that I still work for, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino here at USF, he was one of the professors that was presenting, work in their lab to try to get new PhD students. And most of the work that he was doing at the time was actually on seizures. But at the very end of his presentation, he said, "Oh, and I have this project that we're not doing yet, but there's basically this idea for this project using this diet to treat cancer." And he kind of talked about it very briefly. And I think it just really, I was like, wow, that's such a fascinating idea to me. And, one of the highlights was this is a non-toxic approach to cancer. And I think probably everyone that's going to be listening to this has had an experience with cancer, someone they know, a loved one. And for me, one of my earliest experiences, when my father actually had brain tumors when he was very young. When he was 8 years old, he had brain tumors. They gave him cobalt radiation therapy that saved his life, undoubtedly saved his life. But he had kind of a slow cognitive and physical degeneration over the course of his life because of the radiation therapy that they gave him when he was a child. So, I think there was, when I heard this idea, about this non-toxic way that you could maybe treat cancer, I think part of my personal experience seeing what happens, thankfully there was a treatment that worked for my dad, but what if there was something that wouldn't have also kind of caused those long-term consequences for him? And I think that, kind of made me really interested in the idea. And I contacted the professor. I went to visit the lab, and he's an incredible mentor and has been since I started. And it's just the entire field is very interesting to me. I'm really passionate about what we're doing, so I think we're doing good things that are going to help people. And I love working with my lab team, and I love working for my mentor. So it's been a great place for me to stay and kind of set up my career. So
it sounds fantastic. Like, you certainly really know your stuff. You seem passionate about it. You've kind of ticked most of the boxes that seem to keep a consistent interest in something that you're really, really passionate about.
Thank you. Yeah.
So when you took this opportunity with the PhD you just mentioned, what was the methodology you took when you were actually doing your work?
Yeah, so most of my work was in animal models of cancer. So I did a lot of cell culture to maintain cancer cell lines, and then injected them into animals, and then studied, treatment strategies in the animals. So we did, in vivo bioluminescent imaging of the tumors. This is a way that you can kind of visualize the tumor growth in the animal as the tumor progresses, and then trying these various diets and diet manipulations and the exogenous ketones in the animal model. So a lot of cancer survival studies in animals, and then evaluating tissue from the animals, so doing like immunohistochemistry, and then in parallel kind of mimicking the treatments that we were doing in the cell culture model, so doing various studies on cells, like proliferation studies and viability with fluorescent imaging and things like that. So it was kind of a wide variety of techniques, both animals and cells and tissues. So that was primarily what I did.
Did you find you had to learn most of this as you were going, or did you find you learned most of this during your undergrad, or is it a bit overwhelming when you come to it and you're just like, whoa, okay?
I was very lucky to have a good undergraduate experience where I worked with primarily with animals, but then we worked with animals kind of briefly and then took tissues from them to do other studies on. So I had a good experience with those aspects of studies, which was nice. But all of the kind of specific techniques that I use, I think most of them I learned in my PhD. That's challenging, but it was. And it was also, at the time we were, my professor was a junior faculty member, so it was me and one other student, and then, so we were kind of setting things up for the cancer research at least, and that was a lot to learn and figure out, but I think that's the best way to learn something is when you have to figure it out on your own. So, working, in the small lab when we were doing that, it really helped a lot. So, yeah, it was fun though, it was challenging, but
fun. One thing I did want to ask, because we know where your research went for the most part. You kind of took it from your undergrad to PhD level, and what you're still studying is a derivative, if not directly leading on from what you were doing. Did you find there are any heavy limitations, when you were doing your research? Any techniques or studies you wanted to do, but either ethically or technically you were not able to?
So I think the biggest thing for us in our work is the difficulty in acquiring funding for it. And I know that funding overall is extremely difficult right now. At least in the United States, it's really, it's
just
bleak.
As bad over here too. It's pretty abysmal.
Assumed, but yeah. But there's what we're doing is a little bit out of mainstream. It's becoming, thankfully, in the past couple of years, it's gotten a lot more interest because of the quality of the preclinical data that's coming out. But especially when we started, I mean, this was pretty out of left field, kind of ideas that we were testing, and it's hard to get funding for something like that. Also, diet. Especially when you talk about maybe moving into a clinical trial or something, it's difficult. Most clinical trials are funded by pharmaceutical companies. There's not that type of interest in a diet study, right? I mean, it's not something that there is no really tangible, profitable kind of outcome for a diet. And it's definitely, I don't, some people say, oh, there's conspiracy theories about, people don't want to fund this because they know it works. I don't think that's true at all. I just think that it's the reality of the situation is that if there's not, a tangible kind of benefit or obvious outcome, who's going to put up the money? And you have to rely then on, charitable foundations, donations, and industry partners, and when you can get them. And we've been really lucky to have some incredible philanthropists, friends, now friends of the lab, but people who are just interested and passionate about what we're doing, a lot of them because they had personal experiences, family members with cancer. And it's incredible that those types of people would want to put, help kind of move this idea forward, and we're very appreciative of that. But that was probably one of the biggest difficulties. It's just trying to find the funds to do the studies.
Yeah, I can imagine. But once you got that funding, I suppose it's smooth sailing after that. That makes life a lot better. But it's fantastic to hear that you guys had philanthropists or people funding these opportunities. It sounds great. There's not a lot. Yeah, there's not a lot of fields that have that privilege. Especially, I mean, not many fields hit as close to home as the one you study, so that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Where do you see cancer research going in the future? Do you see it taking more of a technical approach, or are there going to be more of a dietary approach that might develop or evolve from what you guys are doing?
So I think that attention to diet absolutely will be a part of the future for cancer therapy. It's something that was in large part ignored for a very long time. But there are more and more studies coming out showing, benefits of having diets during cancer treatment. Also prevention. I think diet is a huge aspect of cancer prevention, and we're not there studying that yet, but we want to. Right now we're trying to see what it can do for treatment, but I think prevention is really important. But there are certain diets that are absolutely cancer promoting, and I think that if we hopefully, will pay attention to the data that's demonstrating that and move it into clinics. And even since I've been in this field, when I started, like I said, there wasn't much at all going on being talked about. There were a few pioneers in the field doing this work. Some of our collaborators, Dr. Thomas Seifert at Boston College is an incredible pioneer in this field for this idea. And Dr. Adrian Scheck at Barrow Neurological Institute has done a ton of fantastic work. But now it's really growing. There are more and more research studies coming out. And now I think there's at least 12 clinical trials in recruiting in the United States right now for either ongoing or recruiting for the ketogenic diet for various cancers. So I see the trajectory and it's only increasing.
That's fantastic.
I also see that, and I think people also, one thing about this is it gives some power back to the person. And I think a lot of people, when they get a cancer diagnosis, they feel so lost and they feel helpless.
Mm-hmm.
And giving them something that they can actively be doing every day to help themselves, I think it works wonders for their biology and also for, their mental status. I think that's an incredible, powerful tool as well.
That's always one of the things I imagine being the hard part about cancer. I mean, you've got the physical symptoms, but that psychological state where you're not able to help yourself or help someone else, you don't know what to do, or there is nothing you can do to help this. Whereas if you have got this home-based remedy, I hate that term, but like home-based remedy that you can do at home, that you can just work it. On that though, one thing I want to ask, this ketosis diet, does it work only after diagnosis? So can you stick on this high fat, low carbohydrate diet pre or post diagnosis? Is it more effective? Or if you stick on a diet that's very similar to the ketosis diet, are you less likely to develop cancerous symptoms?
So we definitely don't have the data to answer that directly. There's not been large studies to show that. Personally, I would hypothesize that you would get a preventative benefit from this. And I say that because when you look at kind of the physiological effects of ketosis, you're kind of moving the needle in the right direction in a large number of important areas. So you're reducing your overall blood glucose. High blood glucose is linked to cancer development and growth. You're reducing your blood insulin. High insulin is linked to cancer, growth and origination. You're reducing kind of inflammation. That's a huge one. Chronic inflammation is really tied to cancer development and progression. And ketosis, there's lots of data that shows it directly kind of lessens inflammation. Most people also have, so a lot of people go on the ketogenic diet to lose weight. So generally speaking, you lose fat mass, you improve many cardiovascular kind of biomarkers in terms of your blood lipids improve, triglycerides go down, HDL, which is your good cholesterol, typically goes up. So, and there's actually like a large movement right now in the general health kind of environment. There's a lot of people now going keto just for general health. There's a lot of studies that suggest that this is probably very beneficial in many ways. It's something that I think, we definitely don't know the answer for cancer specifically because we just haven't had the large studies, but everything that I'm seeing about it seems to really support this. We need more research on it.
Yeah.
But it seems like, it would be very beneficial. So
it sounds like a fad diet.
We'll see.
It sounds like a fad diet that actually has the support of scientific evidence, which is a rare thing at times.
Yeah.
With a question that I sent you before, and I'm unsure whether you do have a standpoint on it. However, medicinal marijuana is getting a lot of news time and publicity for its cancer-fighting benefits, I suppose. Do you happen to have a standpoint on where that is? Is there the scientific evidence to support medicinal marijuana as a cancer-fighting treatment option?
So there are definitely, this is not my field, but I have looked into the literature on this before. There are absolutely some very good quality studies that show direct anti-cancer effects of cannabidiol, CBD, which is kind of the structural isomer to THC, right, or medicinal marijuana, in this category. There is definitely evidence to suggest that this could have a therapeutic benefit. I think that it absolutely should be researched further. When you consider talking about cancer, you consider the types of drugs that are standard of care for cancer and their horrible side effects, to be quite honest. I don't understand the a pushback on studying something like this. And if there's a chance that it works, which the preclinical data that I've read definitely warrants more investigation, then I think we should be investigating it. And in terms of both the anti-cancer effects that it might have, and then also the potential effects to lessen side effects of treatment is also something that it's being investigated for. So there's not enough research out there because it is, it's heavily regulated in terms of who can and can't research this. But I would love to see more research on it, because if it's an option that could work, then I think that would be fantastic. There's overall cancer treatments still today, especially for people who are diagnosed with late stage cancer, don't have a lot of good options for long-term, cure of their cancer. So I think we should be studying it. So
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, it would change things if, in 5-10 years time, you're the healthy one if you're having lots of bacon and eggs and a joint for breakfast.
Yeah.
But
yeah. That would change things. You're right.
yeah. The one thing I wanted to just, I don't know if you're aware of it, but you said that you were interested in like the malaria thing when you first got into it. Have you heard of the CRISPR gene drive approach? It's the genetics modification.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's up your street. Yeah. Did you hear that they were planning on doing with the malaria in the aspect of it?
Oh, with malaria. I don't think I've heard that specifically. No.
So what they found is a gene drive is a hereditary trait. A hereditary trait that is a guaranteed dominant gene that will be passed through their offspring. So what they've done is they made two sets of mosquitoes. So they got the original that they had white eyes for, and they carry malaria. Whereas they made a second set with red eyes to distinguish them, but they actually put a gene drive in there that prevented the malaria virus from being able to be dormant inside the mosquito. And they put them in a box together, and then they brought them out within 2 generations rather than tons. They were all the red-eyed ones, and they no longer carried the malaria gene. And it's still getting in its final stages of research, but there's some fantastic TED Talks out there as well that are like 20 minutes long, where they're looking at, well, they suspect that if this goes ahead very, very soon, then malaria itself could be for the most part eradicated by taking away the host. So they will put these mosquitoes into the environment that have this malaria resistant gene, and they'll pass it through offspring. Right. And they recommend in something they estimate in like a year of release, this gene drive will be carried throughout the whole population, and malaria in locations won't be able to be, I suppose, carried from host to host, which I thought was absolutely incredible. And then when you really look into the technology of the gene drive, it becomes scary because it's really simple and you can modify almost any organism that exists, and it just, But CRISPR gene drives in themselves are absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, CRISPR is an incredible technique. It'll be interesting to see where it goes from here, right? So I think it was just like 2 months ago, the first human, right, was CRISPR was used on the first human with lung cancer, I think. That was a recent study.
I did, that slipped me by.
Yeah, check it out. It's fascinating. We'll see. I hope that works out exactly how they want it to. That's pretty incredible. I'll definitely check out those TED Talks.
Yeah. Do you happen to have anything I usually ask guests if they have anything they advocate or their messages they wish to pass on to any listeners to say what they have to say. Do you happen to have anything you'd wish to pass on?
I would say, that's a good question. I think maybe kind of from the theme of this talk has been the importance of diet. And I think everyone knows that in this kind of general sense, but maybe, after listening to something like this, realizing the, significant power that diet has for your health, that maybe that would kind of underscore how important it really is. Choosing what you feed and nourish your body with really does make a huge difference in terms of what your body is able to do and its health in general. So I would just kind of encourage everyone to make one small, positive change in their diet and try to keep that consistent and make it a lifestyle. So that would be my tip.
I completely agree. I mean, I feel terrible because you've just said that right after Christmas and New Year, which is never a good time of year for anyone, even the healthy.
No.
But I completely agree. A diet is incredibly important for someone encourage the energy levels, even to get active at the gym. They might need the energy from a diet to actually have that concentration. If they want to perform better at school or at work, your diet makes a significant difference. Like, I remember there was a study that assessed the adolescent concentration levels in school with a cereal diet for breakfast, or a fruit diet, or then the high protein diet. And the cereal was, quite obviously the worst one, causing spikes of sugar and insulin and just all over the shop.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll probably call it there, but thank you very, very much for coming on. It's been an absolute delight to talk to you. I can happily say at your age, you've definitely one of the most successful people I've ever bumped into.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you. Thank you so much. I had a blast. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that chocolate's still off the table, I hope, for you.
No, I don't think so.
Good.
And that's it for us today. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I'd like to thank Angela again for giving me the time of day to talk to her. And if you want to find out more about us or just keep in touch, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We're always throwing up interesting articles and starting discussions. And yeah, that's all I really have to say today. But thank you very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you next week. Goodbye.